The life of a slave consisted of never-ending hard work. Also, the fear of harsh punishments and brutality. It also consisted of the constant fear that one's family could be split apart at the whim of a slaveholder. Women were always under the threat of potentially being sexually or physically abused by the slave master. Slaves were considered property or chattel, not human. This justified the ability for owners, slaveholders, to buy or sell or lease um, slaves at will, treating them much more as a commodity or property rather than as human individuals. So we might ask, what allowed slavery to exist for so long, and how did Southerners justify this? First and foremost was the notion of racism, the idea that blacks were simply inferior to whites and couldn't really do anything else except labor. On the right, you see a misportrayal, I should say, of the difference in skulls, and the idea that African Americans were more similar to chimpanzees than they were to white people. This was really a pseudoscience that wasn't really based on any actual fact, but there was this intense belief that white people were simply smarter and more capable, and black people were condemned to labor. Second, Southerners used the Bible to justify slavery by recognizing its existence in the book and recognizing the history of the master-servant relations that were expressed in different parts of the Bible. Should also say that the Bible was used by abolitionists in the North to justify the eradication of slavery. So it really depended on whose interpretation was being used. Number three was human progress required, in some people's mind, this elite cultivation of society. So some people in the South believe that whites were meant to be scientists, to be architects, to be great thinkers, writers, and that this was what was going to create human progress and a better life for everyone, ideas of the Enlightenment. And they justified the use of slaves in order for Black Americans to be doing the work in the fields and all the hard labor, so that more white people would engage in more intellectual, scientific inquiry and thinking to cultivate society. Fourth was this idea that slavery allowed white people in the South to have a better sense of equality and pursue upward social mobility by going after slaves and trying to own them in order to acquire wealth, and that that slavery actually provided more opportunities for people in white society, and that it was a form of economic freedom for whites at the expense of slaves, of course. Finally, the notion of paternalism existed, and this was the idea that slave owners actually cared for slaves like family. Many slaveholders felt that they were being compassionate and empathetic to slaves. They believed that they were doing what was best for them because they couldn't do anything for themselves. So clearly, all these ideas are misplaced and were used to really justify an institution that existed for hundreds of years to benefit the whites in society.